Right here is our third generation Toyota 4Runner, and I want to share with you the top 5 problems that we have found with this vehicle. Now the first one is going to be a misfire / hesitation, so let's get into that. As you can imagine, there are many things that can make an engine run rough. However, in our case, it's going to come down to the mass airflow sensor, most likely, which sits right here after your air filter before the rest of the air intake. I removed the sensor from the vehicle so I can show you it in more detail. This is the whole assembly, and that right there is the sensor itself. What it does is it measures the airflow getting drawn into the engine as well as its temperature, because the temperature will define the amount of oxygen that is in said volume of air. The engine needs to know that so it can mix the proper amount of fuel with it to run efficiently and smoothly. The problem arises when this doesn't do its job and measures inaccurately, because that basically will confuse the computer and therefore will make the engine run rough. And in even worse cases, it'll cause a misfire, meaning the fuel in one or more of your cylinders is not getting combusted, burnt. So you'll have raw fuel going down the exhaust, your check engine light will be flashing, and you don't want to drive the vehicle when that happens. For our second problem, we're going to continue talking about drivetrain issues. And for this one, you're going to notice some abnormal shifting from the transmission, but the transmission is not to be blamed for this issue. What it will come down to is your throttle position sensor that sits right here on the throttle body. So I took the air intake duct off, that way you can have a better view and I can explain to you what is happening here. This throttle body is cable operated, so what that means is this cable attaches to your accelerator pedal on the other side. On this side, it'll open and close the throttle based on your throttle input. However, the throttle position sensor will talk to the computer and tell it how open this is. And this will affect the transmission, because let's say you floor it, that goes wide open. It's actually going to open a little more because there's a motor in there, so when the car is on, it'll open all the way. But this needs to sense that it's wide open so it can downshift into 1 or 2 previous gears for you so you can get all that power down to the tires. So let's talk about some fixes for this issue. The first thing I would try is to readjust the throttle position sensor. If you think it's out of adjustment, try to move it around. There's an adjustment on it and see if that fixes your issue. However, if you think it's faulty and it went bad, just replace it. But another thing I would do is check that throttle body. Make sure it's clean. Open up the throttle blade and make sure that there's no debris in there. A lot of times there will be carbon buildup in it, so you can take the throttle body off and clean it if there is a lot built up in there. That will usually affect the throttle position sensor. So let's talk about our third problem, and this will be our last drivetrain related issue. What you'll notice here is that the engine won't start, and although there are multiple things that can cause this, in our case it's going to come down to a starter issue. And what you'll notice is that the starter has an exposed power wire here. This will come like this from the factory too. So what happens is over time it corrodes. When it corrodes, this wire could break off. That means the connection isn't being made. So when you turn that key, you might hear the solenoid click because it's commanding and sending power to the starter, but the connection isn't being made here, so the starter will not turn the engine over. And once you've determined that this is broken, the only thing you can do is replace the whole starter assembly, and you can get a new one at oneauto.com and keep driving down the road safely. For our fourth problem, let's talk about some emission-related components. All you'll notice for this is a check engine light on your dash, but the vehicle will still run and drive just fine. What this comes down to is a bad charcoal canister or a bad purge valve. The charcoal canister filters the fumes from your fuel tank and either sends them to be burnt through the engine or sends them out to atmosphere, but they have to be filtered first. What controls the flow of those fumes is the purge valve, and either of those two components can go bad, mostly because they're underneath the car where they get built up with sand and debris from the road. Also, if they're old, let's say the vehicle is 25 years old with hundreds of thousands of miles on them, they just get plain worn out, and whichever one the issue is, you have to replace it. So if you know these vehicles, you were probably wondering if I was going to mention this. And here I am with our fifth and final problem, frame rot. Now a lot of these had this problem, and Toyota actually issued a recall for this, and if you qualify for it, you can get a free frame replacement. To know if you qualify, the best way to do it is to call your local dealer and give them your VIN. They will then tell you whether you do or do not qualify. There are other ways around it, but this is the best way to fix it. So there you have it. Those are the top 5 problems that we have found with this third generation Toyota 4Runner. Overall, these are great vehicles and they are very reliable. If you have one of them or you know of any problems that we did not mention, leave them down in the comment section below. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so that you can stay up to date with all of our latest content.